very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I flew up yesterday from San Francisco, and I come up here occasionally. Juniper has been investing more and more in Canada in particular, and we're very excited about being part of the larger ecosystem up here in Canada. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to get invited here when it's not cold. I keep trying, and it just hasn't really worked out yet. But there's always the next time. So the previous speakers have been great lead-ins for me because I wanted to talk about the platform for innovation and in the theme of things like smart infrastructure and in terms of developing these new types of applications and creating these new types of ecosystems and new business opportunities. First and foremost, we believe that the network is probably been the single biggest platform for innovation that the world has seen thus far, right? And as a sponsor and a proud member of CENGN, we agree with what Ritch said before, which is, we're all about networking, right? We're all about how do you continue to expand upon the network as a platform for innovation. In order to get to this next phase of innovation, which is really built around things like smart infrastructure, IoT, and so forth, we believe that there's going to be yet another development wave around platforms. And what we're going to talk about today in terms of what we call Telco Cloud is we believe that that's where innovation is going to come from in this next wave. And it's a bit of a mix of topics because we're going to be talking about networking, but we're very much going to be talking about cloud. And so that's really what my discussion is going to be about today. All right, let me see if I can make this work. So I'm going to skip over that. So everybody starts with their own facts. So I'm going to start with my facts to sort of frame my topic and ground the discussion a little bit. Some of these are probably quite obvious to most of us, but over the next several years, the pace of change is really going to pick up dramatically, and it's being driven in a large part by this move towards the cloud. So this notion of where we're at in cloud today is just the very beginning, right? So Amazon tripling, in terms of the size of their revenue is the early phase of what we're going to see in terms of cloud. What we're suggesting here is by 2019, that companies are going to be predominantly putting most of their applications into the cloud. And I'll talk about this in just a second. When all of the applications are actually sitting somewhere else, they're not sitting within the bounds of the organization, it has dramatic implications for the network. And it not only creates challenges, but it creates significant opportunities. As a result of that, what you're expecting to see is that most of the traffic that's going to be originating from an organization is no longer going to be swirling around on an east-west basis or within the organization itself. Instead, it's all going to be heading out over the wide area network. And so if we think that we have demands on our wide area bandwidths today, in the next generation of networks, we're going to see even more dramatic demands on it. The previous speakers already talked about there's a significant number of devices that are expected to be connected to the network over the next 3 to 5 years. Our number here is 25 billion. I think what's more dramatic to me is just the massive numbers of those devices that will be things, right? So, over half of those devices are expected to be things rather than people working through some sort of device. And that's going to have a significant implication for the way the networks are going to have to work. Video, YouTube, the cat videos, some of the prior speakers talked about that as well. There's just going to be more and more sources of video and more consumption of video that's going to be done over these networks. Again, and these are not local area networks. These are all going to be wide area networks where the video traffic is going to be moving. And then finally, and this was a topic that really hasn't been raised yet, is the need for security. And if anybody's really been paying attention more recently, so the recent DIME denial of service attack, or a little bit earlier, but the Jeep attack, the notion of us moving towards Internet of Things, while it's very exciting, it also creates immense security challenges. And so we believe that not only is security from an enterprise perspective going to continue to become extremely important, but as we start to add more and more devices to our networks, the ability to authenticate, isolate, and be able to secure those devices and the data and the overall network is going to become a huge imperative. And so building out this next generation platform that is the network, is the telco cloud, is going to require very strong thinking around how we're going to secure everything. Okay? So that sort of sets it up. So I'm sort of getting to what exactly is a telco cloud, but I'm just going to start by building up the fact base, and then we'll actually talk about what we mean when we say telco cloud. So when we think about these trends and we think about what that's going to mean in the next couple of years, we think about it in terms of these three big swim lanes. So what's going to change for the enterprise, what's going to change for the mobile and the fixed network, and what's going to change in terms of the smart edge, or these devices that are all going to now be connected to the network. And when we start with the devices, this idea that applications are all going to be somewhere else, right? All of the things that I access on a daily basis, whether it be my back office applications, or it's my production applications that I'm using for various automation aspects of my business, or it's customer-facing applications that are being used to serve services, all of those things are going to be somewhere else. And now I'm going to start looking at how do I actually provision the network and security services that I'm using for my resources to protect those things, both in terms of the people that are part of my organization and then the applications where they're sitting somewhere else, right? I mean, I'm not going to go into the future world and just say, I'm going to completely trust that Amazon's going to secure all of my applications. I'm not going to assume that Microsoft is going to completely secure all my applications. I'm not going to want to do individual provisioning of devices anymore in my network. I'm going to want to start thinking about how can I take advantage of virtualization and cloud-based management. And all of these things, when you start to put them together, it starts to argue for a different type of network architecture that allows you to not only get better economies with regards to provision of those services, but also much greater levels of agility and security in terms of providing it. Because you can actually maintain things on a more dynamic basis. You can start to apply things like machine learning and so forth. For the mobile fixed network, the previous discussion was great, talking about the implications of 5G. We actually think 5G is going to have a dramatic impact on the architecture of the network. And it's not just because of the requirements that were discussed, so lower latency, greater demand for video, greater demand for bandwidth, but also just the architecture. So there was a question in the back before about how you're going to deliver latencies that are within the requirements that people are discussing today. And one of the key ways that we see that starting to develop into the future is that you're going to start pushing services further and further out to the edge, right? You're going to start seeing the density of these cells. And so there was a discussion earlier about, small cells. The number of small cells, the amount of infrastructure that's going to have to be put in place to deliver these types of bandwidths, as well as to deliver the types of services at the latencies that we're discussing, is going to require a very, very large number of cells. And that in order to have that level of infrastructure, you're going to go to something that you can deploy in a virtual framework. You're going to want to control that with cloud-based management. You're going to have effectively the characteristics of a cloud, okay? And so that's going to be, in our view, a key part of the infrastructure that you're going to need for delivering 5G services. It's also going to enable that whole movement that we were talking about throughout the day so far of fixed wireless, right? So eliminating the need to actually invest in wires in the ground. If you can now start to provision those services at high bandwidth directly using wireless infrastructure, and you can have that run on the same basic backbone as your wired infrastructure, then you can create incredible economies of scale. For IoT, it's the same thing. If you have this platform and you have the ability to provide services for the mobile applications, if you have this platform that you're able to provide enterprise-level applications. You can also provide IoT applications, right? So you can create this baseline platform for running a wide number of applications. You can really turn the network into a platform for that particular purpose. Because it's more distributed, because it's built for the cloud, you have an abstraction of the underlying infrastructure from the applications. Because it's built for the cloud, you have the ability to do rapid innovation using DevOps, as people like to talk about. And because it's built for the cloud, you have the ability to provide those services in many different locations at very low latency, which is really important for certain applications, especially things like connected car and so forth. So I think there was a comment made in an earlier presentation about the so what. And so, the one thing that, when you're in the networking world, you have to get very comfortable very quickly with the idea that a lot of what you do doesn't get seen. You effectively become the plumber in some instances. And so it's very easy to sometimes get enamored by the technology and not necessarily think about what the so what is. I actually think that, this audience very much gets the so what, but I'll just articulate our point of view. First and foremost, it's really about speed to market, right? When you create a platform, something like a Telco cloud, which I'll describe in a bit more detail in just a minute, what you're really enabling is the time that it takes to come up with an idea and get that technology into market gets shorter and shorter, right? The time to deliver innovation to value gets shorter and shorter. And when you look at something like Amazon, just as an example, and you think about what Amazon's effect on the industry has been by really creating that platform that allows any startup, right? All they have to do is take a credit card, they go to Amazon, they provision some compute and storage, and then they're off to the races in terms of their innovation. That's the phase that we're moving into. Now you might ask yourself, well, if Amazon's already out there and there's Azure, there's Google, there's SoftLayer, there's a number of platforms that are already out there, why do we need anything else? And again, I'm going to refer to one of the previous speaker comments when they were talking about the ends of Moore's Law, right? People have been saying that we're sort of at the end of Moore's Law, that's why we're going to scale out architectures in the cloud. By the same token, we're going to start seeing specialization of clouds, right? So the notion of just there being one type of cloud for all types of applications, I think is a little bit premature. What we expect to see, for example, is that, artificial intelligence and big data type applications, deep learning type applications are probably going to start to have specialized clouds. We're going to start to see that certain applications that are geared towards, more like back office type applications or things that are less sensitivity are going to have their own types of clouds. By the same token, what we expect to see is that there's going to be a class of cloud that's going to be developed, which we've been calling telco cloud, or we also call distributed cloud, which is really geared towards how do you marry the value of the network, meaning where you need bandwidth consumption, where you need low latency, where you need the ability to take full advantage of the capabilities of the network, to provide a new class of services that essentially meet those swim lanes that I described before and really reduce the time to value for those types of applications. And in doing that, now you're going to be able to have much greater levels of security and much greater levels of agility in terms of whether it's on the enterprise side or the consumer side. So what is telco cloud? Hopefully after that big build-up, everybody's like, God, what the hell is it? Actually, it's a map of Ontario. And I have to admit, I was trying to make sure that I was being very focused on what we do here in Canada when we put the slide together. But I don't think I know my geography of Ontario much beyond this portion down here at the south. So don't hold me accountable if anything looks too off. So here's just the basic idea, right? The essential idea is that as this picture shows here on the right, you're going to have, instead of just one place where you're going to provision compute and storage, and in some cases networking services, you're going to have many, many places, right? And they're going to be of varying sizes. You may have, you know, a data center that consists of hundreds of racks of compute and storage capability, as well as networking services. You may have very small sites, which today are central offices for a number of the telcos, that are converted into very small data centers that provide quick access because of the distance, right? Speed of light issues. Because of the distance, they provide very quick access to services to drive latencies down. So the thing about the telco cloud is, what you're looking to do is, how do I take all of those locations together and build them into one large virtual cloud, right? So that for the purpose of the person building the application, or even more importantly, the person that's actually operating this cloud, they're not treating it like, you know, 50 different sites that each one of them has to go in and they have to keep pulling out equipment and they have to keep going in and doing command line interface provisioning. But instead, they're doing dynamic management of this cloud. They're doing DevOps. They're doing you know, active management to maintain very high service levels, right? That's what a telco cloud really is. So it's a distributed virtual cloud where you have multiple instances. The other thing that's key about a telco cloud, and this is a little bit unlike, you know, something like AWS, is whereas AWS is very centralized, it's also built for applications that are very transactional in nature, right? So they tend to be much more compute intensive, much more storage intensive, whereas the types of applications that we're talking about, the ones that we were articulating in those swim lanes, those are really more network intensive, right? So you're gonna have a combination of virtualized network functions, security functions that are going to be operating, you know, within this cloud infrastructure to provide those services, and then you'll also be providing applications, right? So think things like virtual reality, augmented reality. If your kids are into Pokemon Go, you know what augmented reality is, and God help us if more of that starts to come, right? Caching, right? The original caching networks, CDN networks, are effectively telco clouds. But there's going to be another generation as we try to respond to the bandwidth requirements and video demand that's going to be coming in the next generation network. And then latency, especially for things like IoT, and having that abstraction where now each one of these clouds is providing that same application, but it's being run like it's one application overall. That's really what the opportunity is with telco cloud. That's going to require a new design of the network, right? It's going to be the merging of the WAN backbone and the data center LAN, right? We're going to be actually building networks that can operate at scale very effectively, very much like Amazon, but we're going to be doing it over WAN distances, right? So that's a really unique opportunity, and it's one, by the way, that I think is very exciting, because if we're able to do this successfully, then I think we'll really change the nature of innovation. So it sounds exciting. I mean, at least to me it's exciting, but I'm a networking guy, so I get kind of excited by this sort of thing. But is it something that's easy to do, right? You know, there's standards bodies currently working on it today. Etsy's putting a lot of time and energy into it. Practically every company in the world is talking about their NFV strategy. There's, you know, many open source consortiums that are working on NFV. I'm not sure it's as simple as that. And I think that was really what I wanted to talk about today, that I think the challenge of telco cloud is a bit bigger than what we're giving it credit for. And I think it's going to take some real energy on our side in order to make it work. So here's the basic problem. One of the basic problems. I'll get into the second basic problem in a second. The basic problem is that the networks that we built today were built to run at very high SLAs, but they were also built to run with a lot of different services that were provisioned with a lot of traffic, right? So the way that we did that, and Juniper was one of the innovators in this space, along with a number of our peer companies, but the way that we did that is we built these integrated systems, right? They're very tightly integrated. The systems have incredible performance capability. It's a combination of what you can do in hardware and software that really enabled those things to work. They were done actively working together with our customers and our partners in other companies through standards bodies to create things that had open interoperability capabilities. Fantastic innovation that occurred there. Again, it created the internet, the single biggest platform for innovation the world's ever seen. The next generation architecture that we're going to, though, imagine if you take something as complicated as, say, your cell phone, right? Take your smartphone, right, the one that we all so lovingly take advantage of, and now break it into 50 different pieces, right? So pull it all apart into its components, okay? And now have every single one of those components come from somebody else. And now you get all 50 different components, and you have to put it back together again and actually make it work as well as this one works, right? That's the challenge that we're talking about. This is not a trivial activity. We're going through a massive transformation of the way that we think about how networks are built. We're going through a massive transformation in terms of creating a new class of cloud platform, okay? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is it's not something that happens, through one wave of innovation, right? It's actually going to happen through multiple waves of innovation. I'm sort of suggesting 2 waves of innovation, but honestly, it's going to be n number of waves of innovation. And it's going to be iterative. And you can see this today. There's a number of early Telco cloud applications. We're working with a number of our customers on these early phase applications. A number of the customers here in Canada are leading the way, as well as some of their peer companies in the US and Europe. And so we're in the early days of this. But what I'd like to talk about is the first phase, the one that we're going to right now, is what we call integrated disaggregated, right? We figured out a way to break the appliances apart into lots of component parts. And now we've got the early implementations of how we put it all back together again and actually make it run, right? Now, there's going to be value that's going to be created in doing that, but the value is probably not going to be in line with what our expectations are for either dollars in terms of dollar savings or dollars of revenue that's returned, or in terms of actual opportunities to then create a scale-up platform. This is just the beginning, right? This is actually not dissimilar from what happened in the compute world as well. The next opportunity, whether it's 2.0 or it's N.0, whatever it is, the one that we're striving for, the vision for what telco cloud could be, is the one that's articulated here, where we have a true virtual distributed scale-out architecture. It's cloud native. And what does cloud native mean? Well, it will probably look a little bit like where you have a physical layer that's completely abstracted from the software layer, right? The software layer will look more PaaS-like than it looks infrastructure as a service-like. The PaaS will have a set of infrastructure, virtualized network and security functions that are built into it directly, right? And so there'll be a shift from the idea of each one of those things being vendor provided to that being more integrated directly into the platform. And that'll be done really more to ease the application towards a standard level of policy management, a standard level of isolation, a standard level of functionality. Above that platform, there'll be a standard set of APIs, and that set of APIs will first expose something that looks a lot like a connectivity platform. So something that authenticates and manages all of the different applications, users, and devices that are being connected to the network. So if you think like traditional evolved packet core or BNG type services today, one of the things that we would envision is in the future you start to see those built directly into the platform. Above that, that's where the applications will sit. And some of those applications will be security functions, some of them will be network functions. A lot of them will start to become application functions that either work on the data, analytics, sensor applications, things like that, or it'll be applications that are designed to provide outward-facing services to end users. So things like, augmented reality and so forth. That's really where we think we're going, right? That's going to be a microservices-based architecture. The notion of what's going to be SDN is going to be dramatically different than what it is today. It's going to be much more robust. You're going to have orchestration that's going to have to work across, again, the wide area network and multiple distributed sites. And we believe that you're going to be looking at something that's highly organized towards how do you maximize the performance of that solution. So as we think about where the world is going in this space, we started to think about, okay, what does a solution even look like? What are some of the questions that we need to ask? What are some of the questions that customers need to ask? What are some of the questions that consumers of this cloud need to ask? And we started thinking about it in terms of two dimensions. First, the architectural dimension, and then second, what are the business dimensions? The first thing we thought about is it even deployable? And there's a critical piece here that's really interesting when you look at it, especially because if you sort of imagine where we're coming from and where we're going to, we're not starting from zero, right? We're starting from a network today, right, in many cases, and there are different types of networks, but we're starting from networks today that have been around for a while, right? We have brownfields. And when we have brownfields, we have legacy protocols, we have legacy services, we have lots and lots of legacy. And if we're going to support all of that legacy with the next generation of the network, which includes providing some of these services in telco clouds, that's going to be one architectural decision that will drive a lot of specific decisions into the architecture of the cloud itself. By contrast, if we decide to go greenfield, truly greenfield, then we have the opportunity to possibly optimize this for the future, right? And so that's a big decision, whether or not it's going to be something that's purely greenfield versus something that's optimized for the past. Great example. Think about, again, use Amazon as your reference point. Amazon was built as a greenfield service, right? They weren't thinking about how do you support all these legacy applications. They weren't thinking about how do I make sure that enterprises can run the things that they run today in exactly the same way that they run them today, right? They weren't trying to maintain backward compatibility. Instead, they focused on, let's build something that actually works very effectively for this particular environment, and then people started migrating to them over time, right? So there is a reference point out there. I'm not saying it's the right reference point for what we're going to, but I think it's a key decision that we have to take as we think about building out this type of platform. The second question is really about manageability and serviceability. And again, a lot of what we've been doing up to this point is a little different than where we're going. When we start to build out a cloud, and we start to think about running a cloud 24/7, very high SLAs, very low latencies. In some cases, you're going to have critical emergency services that are going to be depending on these networks, are going to be depending upon these clouds. You're going to have to start thinking about, what do I do when it breaks, right? And when it breaks, it's different than when the network breaks, right? This is actually about a cloud going down. And if you look at a lot of the reference points that are out there today, so we have a number of enterprise customers as well as cloud providers that build fairly large clouds. And the way they think about building a resilient cloud is very different than the way we're going to have to think about building a resilient cloud in this type of case. So thinking about automation, thinking about operations is going to be key, okay? Is it better than what we do today? And I think, what I was trying to articulate in the last slide is better has a lot of different connotations, right? So better could be, it's a better financial profile. Better could be that I'm getting a higher level of service. Better could be that I'm getting more services, so I'm getting a statistical multiplexing gain from the platform. I think the one overall metric that we've started focusing on is better ultimately means, do I get shorter time to value, right? Do I really get an agility benefit? Do I really get an innovation benefit? Because again, the long-term value of these platforms, how they really return value, is by maximizing the time to value monetization and the time of innovation realization in the marketplace. And then finally, does it reduce cost? Does it increase revenue? And I skipped over this, but I should just go back to it. Is it more secure, right? Have I designed in security? Have I built in for the possibility of all of the potential threats that are in the marketplace today, right? These are the types of decisions that we have to take as we start to build these types of services. And all the while, a lot of the things that we take for granted today, you know, that when I turn it on, it'll just work, that has to be there as well. So you can't talk about telco cloud, you can't talk about virtualization of the network without putting up the obligatory Etsy slide. So this is our obligatory Etsy slide. So we obviously do a lot of things in this space today, as I said before. I'm actually not going to walk you through the architecture because I don't really think it's that interesting. The reason I put the slide up is it gave me a good lead-in to talk about something that we recently did, which was we acquired this company called AppFormix. So Cliff, who was up here earlier today, actually gave a little commercial for it. I didn't pay him to do that, although I'll certainly buy him a cocktail later. The reason for showing you this is it gives you a chance for us to show you how AppFormix actually fits within this architecture. So many of you know that some of the standard components of what people have been doing in NFV and Telco Cloud is you've got the service orchestration piece, and then you have the physical orchestration piece, or the VIM. And we put a lot of investment there. Contrail, Open Contrail is a big part of some of the capabilities that we deliver to the market today. AppFormix extends this capability. It was something that we're very excited about. We just got the deal done here last week. We're very excited about it because what they really focus on is bringing analytics and machine learning to operating a cloud, right? The idea is, how do you run a cloud at scale, right? So, the technology that they're using today is being used to run very large clouds at scale. How do you run those at scale with very low OpEx, very few people, and do it in such a way that if things break, you can respond to it and maintain very high SLAs? The only way to really do that is with automation, it's with analytics, deep telemetry, and the ability to use or start to leverage technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so while Cliff was right that there's a big part of the acquisition that was really about bringing in some very smart people and some interesting technology, AppFormix is actually something that's out there today. It's being deployed live, and it's something that we're are now going to start leveraging directly into the architecture that we're going to be moving forward with for the Telco Cloud. So that actually, I had my commercial slide in there for AppFormix, basically just talking about what the capabilities are and how it's built into, already built into some of the deployments that we're doing today, and then how we're going to continue to extend that into the future. So it's very exciting, and it's something that we're really looking for driving forward. Cliff also mentioned some of the work that we're doing in self-driving networks. So that's a next generation activity that we have, and AppFormix will be a part of that as well. So I'm out of time here, so I'm just going to start to wrap up. I did want to make just a couple of quick statements, and then I'll summarize. The main point that I was trying to make, and what I was trying to ultimately start to get the dialogue going on, is that the telco cloud, the platform, and here it's articulated as the centralized cloud services, also then extends into other parts of the network. So the customer premise equipment, the cell site, the point of presence, all of these pieces of the network are going to progressively become part of this cloud, and we're going to have to start managing them like a large virtual distributed platform. So making the architectural choices today towards creating that platform is going to be key. And we don't have to make those choices. We can make the choices towards maintaining legacy, we can maintain, or we can take the choices towards, how do we maximize the current, capital infrastructure that we have today. Those are all valid choices, but we think that the real value is going to be created when we actually put that platform in place, and some of the architectural elements that we're starting to put together are geared in that way. And that sort of then gives me an opportunity to also talk about how we've been working with CENGN a little bit, leveraging some of the components of that architecture in an early smart city initiative. Another effort was mentioned earlier by Ritch as well. And so we're very excited about this idea of continuing to foster innovation in the telco cloud space, how that then lends itself to the smart edge, and more specifically working with the CENGN team, which we think is doing some fantastic stuff. So here's my takeaways. So the timing is right for telco cloud. We think that the opportunity really is starting to present itself, and that there is a strong need for building out this type of platform. It's ripe for innovation. There's a lot to do. The architectural choices matter, right? So we can either look at building platforms or we can build services, but by building the platform, I think we create that opportunity to significantly reduce time to value. To actually create a meaningful platform, we have to have the ability to build it, operate it, and maintain it at scale. And so that requires, again, some careful thought about how we're actually going to go and deploy this, right? We need to think about some of those choices that we're going to make and whether or not they really will be things that we can operate at scale, and really will they be truly valuable in the platform, because then I think we have the best opportunity to drive this forward. So I'll stop there.